Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first podcast, a podcast where we will say direct questions about all different types of topics. I'm the host, Diana Brown. Please forgive me. This is my first ever podcast. As you know, that I am quite nervous, so I have heard many other podcasts. Today, we are with someone who I can regard as my sister, but not my sister by birth. A sister that by friends. I will let them introduce themselves, a podcast where we will say our pronouns. Over to my darling friend.
Hi there, everyone. My name's Maya, and my pronouns are she and her.
Hi, how are you, Maya?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. I'm excited to be on your first podcast.
Oh,
I feel honored.
I feel good that you're my first on the first podcast. I really am. This podcast isn't about, this isn't about, have a cup of tea on a Sunday afternoon next to a church. This podcast is about direct questions. As you know, that we're both trans, if you don't mind me saying that. And
No,
this
not at all.
podcast is to help people to understand what it is being trans and what it's like. If people don't know, we are both in the UK, and we won't say where we live, but we are in the UK, and this is for UK audiences. But if you are abroad, welcome. We accept anyone abroad, and we hope that you enjoy it and understand that being trans is different to everyone around the world. The first question I would really want to ask you, Maya, is the start of your transition, the start of when you knew you were who you were born to be.
Yeah, so it definitely was a process. The first time that I started really thinking about it was when basically I was doing a counselling course, so a counselling diploma to become a qualified counsellor.
Have you
And
finished
in
it?
order, sorry?
Have you finished the course?
I did, yeah. I finished the course a few years ago. So
Congratulations.
thank you. And as part of the course, you basically have to go on, you have to do your own personal counselling. I think it's like 20 hours. So I resisted doing that for a while, actually, because I was just like, oh, I just can't be, like, I don't know. I really enjoy going to a counsellor. So even though it's difficult sometimes, I didn't really know why I was resisting it. But then I just had to go because it was part of my course. And then through that work I did with my counsellor, I kind of started to, I wouldn't say that it was like a big realization. It was kind of like the start of it. And then over the next few years, it was like a real kind of process, really.
When you said something that I found quite fascinating, because as a person who's finding it hard to speak about mental health, on many other subjects, you said something that's quite interesting. You said that you enjoyed going to the counselor. That's something that's something quite interesting. Could you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah. I think I think it's just something that I've always, like, it's not always enjoyable, but I think I enjoy the process of kind of understanding myself a bit more, really. And it is like, and I recognize like how privileged I sound, because like I know I haven't always been in the position where I've been able to like afford counseling
I
at all.
I totally agree. I think that if people don't know, we in the UK live within a great institution called the NHS. The NHS is free at point of use. If people don't know, the mental health services within the NHS is so diabolical that it's quite shocking, like the time waiting and all that. So it is all about, privilege, and it is all about, really is luck of the draw ticket, really. And that's the one part about it. It is.
Oh, absolutely, because, and I've like volunteered and worked at places that offer free counselling,
That's amazing.
so open access free counselling. But that should be everywhere. It shouldn't be reliant on like the charity sector to deliver that work. I think just the world would be in such a better place if everyone was getting counselling,
Mm.
whatever their like budget, financial situation. And it's an absolute travesty that it works the way that it
I
works.
don't
It
know
really
what,
is.
sorry for interrupting. I don't know why people think that your bank balance has to recur to your health. I think I do believe that within the UK, I believe that if you've got mental health, then you should get the help that you need. It doesn't care if you're a billionaire, if you are living on a food bank. As much as I was on food banks for such a long time, I thankfully hated the idea of going back on a food bank. It's that idea, and it causes so much strain. And going counseling and discussing someone about your issues is something rewarding. It's like a fairy godmother in some ways. It really is such a rewarding thing.
And it shouldn't be a privilege. It should just be a right. And I think
Mm,
I think it's just kind of a reflection of our society at the minute, where it's almost like that attitude of like survival of the fittest. I
mm.
think that's such a strong
Do you think it's toxic?
culture. Do I think
Do you think
it's
it's toxic, or do you think it's just natural, competitive?
no, I don't think I think it's unnatural. I don't think that we're like
Do you
born
think it's
to.
toxic or natural?
Oh, I think it's incredibly toxic, but I
Oh,
don't think I don't think like I don't think anyone's true nature is about like looking after yourself and putting yourself like I think there's an element that we do need to put ourselves first in a way, but I think our natural instinct is support is kind of like if someone's suffering, then everyone's suffering. And I think
because it
with
does spread. It's like that.
yeah,
Sorry for interrupting. It's that element that I think we know as a trans woman, that we know of how hard it is to deal with the toxicity, the mental health, the strain, and people yet still think that we are privileged enough to live in a society where it's perfect, but yet there is no such thing as perfect. So could you explain a little bit more about the whole idea of your view of what it means to be trans within the UK?
it's really bad at the minute. Um, not just
How?
at the
How
minute.
is it bad? Like, what's making it bad?
The media, a lot of the mainstream press, are
You go in
printing.
more detail about that? What make, because the mainstream media is quite vast, even if there is a few big, well-known papers out there that we won't say for legal reasons, but the media out there is so vast. So could you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah. So, well, obviously, I won't kind of name individual, newspapers but yeah, it's kind of like a large handful um, of newspapers mainly that are kind of printing these stories, and it doesn't hasn't just happened to trans people before. This is kind of like this is what happens like when people try and put the blame on a particular minority group or vulnerable group in society. It's like they kind of like try and make people scared of that group so that they believe that they're doing these awful things. So with trans people, particularly trans women, it's almost like trans women are dangerous. They're trying to take away like real women's rights, and they're trying to,
What
and we get kind of like
you said, will real women's rights. Do you not think that that goes into the whole biology situation? Because at the end of the day, I do think that for a lot of trans people, it always comes down to a few things. For people who don't understand what it means to be trans, it's not a secret club, it's not a secret, it's not a club, it's not a phase, it's something that we are born to think. Like, I think it's like the endeavor to always find out who we are, and we do get to a point where we are sick to death of people questioning about, are you sure you're really trans? Are you sure you're really that? And it comes down to quite sadness when it comes down to it, and I think it's very toxic. But I think when it
Mm.
comes down to mental health and so many ideas, oh, there's my cat. When it comes down to certain ideas and certain sort of things, Grace, I do apologize. She does like to answer questions. She is very trans friendly. Um, I d- when it comes down to it, I do agree with you that when it comes down to it, it's always people with responsibility that don't use their power so well, and it's
Mm.
also so much worse and so larger than just us minority.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And I think, yeah, it's just kind of, it's just the same old story. It's like the mainstream media, like trying to divide people and
That
tapping
can't,
into,
but that can't be the only reason. The mainstream media, everyone blames the media, but it can't be just the media because
not just the media, but that I think media have a massive influence on people and like culture and like societal thoughts. And so I think it's kind of like the benchmark of like, this is the newspaper you read, this is not what you need to kind of think. But I think it's also kind of just that's like transphobia on like a system level, but also people's fear of what they don't understand. You know, if you're not trans, or if you don't have someone in your life that's trans, then often it can be really, really difficult to understand what it's like. And um
Grace, sorry,
so that's all right. Hello, my darling. So people kind of take their view from something that they can, something close to them that they can understand, like or they'll read a newspaper and be like, right, that's kind of what trans people are about. So I think it's just a number of things, but
that's really,
yeah,
really, that's really,
you know,
really interesting. I think that you've made a really strong, valid point, but I also think that we also need to take it up a notch when it comes down to understanding about the hate and the hardness and what it means to be trans. And I think we have to say the word what's in the room, like the is it the white elephant in the room and all that?
yeah, I think it's just the elephant in the room,
That's it.
but the
That's
elephant
it.
might be
The
right.
elephant. So I really want to discuss something with you because I haven't done much research about it. And obviously you run a group that I don't know if you want to say, but you run a group and you probably get this question quite a lot. Biology. Do you know anything about it? And have you done your research about it? Because I don't know one thing about it. And that's the one argument what a lot of TERFs or people who are not very welcoming of trans people,
Yeah, I
including
mean, I don't.
non-binary people.
I mean, I don't know much about biology, but what I do know is that most trans people that I speak to aren't debating that, like, someone's kind of biological sex is different. Like, biological sex is different to gender. Like, most trans people would agree with that. But also, like, someone's biology, like, specifically their kind of what's going on with their like sexual organs, um, is like a complex thing. We're not just made up of like penis, vagina. We're also kind of made up of hormones. We're made up of
Why do people always
DNA.
look at the genitalia? Do you think that's a form of sexual harassment or something sexual within it? Because people always look at the genitalia. And I think
Well, I think,
for me as a trans woman, I think that's the one thing when it comes down to intimacy and love and even hook up the culture and all that and just the whole idea of it. And it's so it really does not help the mental health of us.
no, I think like, I mean, I think it's complex, but I think people's obsession with people's genitalia is not just something that trans people deal with. Like, I think cis women's genitalia, their sexual organs are hugely objectified. But in like, sometimes when something happens to you, instead of kind of recognizing that and how painful it was, it kind of sometimes is easier to project it onto another group of people, so onto trans people, for example, because genitalia doesn't like equal
You okay?
gender. Do you know what I mean? Like if you,
Are you okay?
yeah, like,
That's good.
yeah, why?
No, no, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I know that we have to ask big questions because if we don't answer them, then how can we educate other people? For us to grow as a people, we need to ask and, give answers to big, difficult questions. And
Yeah, definitely.
that's how we grow in life. That's point blank of how we grow.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. And I think quite often, like trans people are expected to know loads about gender, loads about biology in order to kind of like justify their existence. But the simple fact is, like, and I can't talk on behalf of like any other trans person, but for me, like, I'm trans, I'm a woman, I don't need to prove it to anyone, I don't need to justify it to anyone, like, and I don't need a degree in gender or biology to kind of to have to be respected. And that's it. Like, simple as that,
I
you
think
know?
I think you're so right when you said that people expect you to know about everything about gender biology. It's like they're asking you to have a doctor's degree to just know who you are. And I think that it harks back to the times, I dare say this, to the 80s when it comes down, or even or way before that, of the lesbian and gay and bisexual movement and all that, of how uninclusive they were to trans people, yet were still divided when it comes down to it. Yet they made the such horrendous comments about from people from straight people to the LGBT, always made horrendous straight comments about us,
Mm,
always called us perverts, always called us such horrendous words. And then
yeah.
in 1980s section 28, it makes you think, is there ever a time where we will ever see closure of, and now accept that we've now got the acceptance we need? Like, is there ever an end stop of knowing that we've reached the point of where we could go?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I think in order for that to happen, and it goes back to that counseling stuff again, in order for that to happen, people need to um, deal with that unresolved trauma and pain. Because I think like the only reason any of this happens, it's not just trans people, it's like refugees, it's people of color, it's left-handed people, it's gingerhead people.
I'm
Like,
left-handed. I'm left-handed.
oh
Benjamin
yeah,
Franklin was left-handed, and there's
really?
a lot of good things about left-handed people. Apart from that, I have heard that we are more likely to become alcoholics. That's what I read
Oh, I
on
didn't
it.
know that. Oh
That's
wow.
I know, and we're also more likely to be dyslexic. So it's quite
Oh
wild.
wow.
But we're getting off subject, and I think that what you are saying is so true about when it comes down to it. But I also think that we also really have to understand that it always comes down to, are we strong enough and are we divided enough, or are we together enough for us to really grow? Because I think that we are divided at the end of the day when it comes down to trying to figure out what we want and what we need and all that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's hard to be united sometimes, um, because it feels like because this stuff can really tire you out. Do you know what I mean? And I think it takes
Mentally and
work.
stressfully, yeah, it can really tire you
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people don't have the energy to kind of like rise up and form communities and kind of fight back. Um, but I think it's really important that we do, and to because there's power in that, there's such power in that. And um, yeah, and I think the voices against trans people are in the minority, but I think they're just loud. And because they don't have like a personal, like their rights aren't being taken away from them, even though they think that they are,
Do you
they're
think that
not. So
comes
they're
down to
not,
the media? Or do you think that
Sorry,
comes down
darling.
to sorry for interrupting, but do you think that comes down to the media and the politicians? Sorry,
Yeah,
do you
yes,
think that
yeah,
comes down to the media and politicians when it
yeah,
comes down to taking it? Like, there is an idea when it comes down to it that if you think that you're taking rights away from someone, then people become scarce, like food. So, like, you
mhm,
take bit by bit away, yet
yeah.
you're not taking nothing away. You're actually giving it to someone else. But it still doesn't make sense. Like, it's all about equalness. And I think that I don't know where this whole idea of taking rights away, like, I think that's so sad. Like, it really is quite fundamentally strange. Oh dear, she's
Yeah.
back. So the biggest question I think we also have to ask, and this is the question that I think that we need to ask for people in the UK and over abroad, and that is the white elephant in the room, not you, Grace.
Or the white cat.
I know. Is Trump. I know he's a controversial thing, but what we have to get out of the room is that in 2020, before he left office, thank God, um, he got a very, very high vote of the LGBT plus. He got a large vote share of the LGBT. Why? Like, what is it about Trump? I
I
mean,
don't think it's. I mean, I don't know whether it's hello, darling.
she's very loving.
Star.
I next time when I do a podcast, I'm most definitely going to lock her in a room or do something drastic. No animal cruelty here.
No. Um, I don't know. I think. Well, I do know. I think you know. There's this. I certainly had this kind of misconception when I first started doing activism work that LGBTQ plus people are free of like prejudice because they wouldn't inflict what they know to be so painful on somebody else. But that's not true. Like we all have the capacity to be prejudiced. So, and I think sometimes your prejudice can be so strong that you kind of forget about the other stuff and you just focus on, you know, so if Trump is, you know, was talking about refugees, you know, people of color, and if your prejudice is so strong that it's almost like, oh my God, Trump represents what I stand for, even though, like, as a whole, like, he is, I mean, he's a disgraceful person. But I think
Isn't
that's kind
he?
of it. Like, he, like, those kind of people really like tap into people's fears and their prejudice. And so I think, you know, it's just,
I think his
uh,
niece, who's also a lesbian, if I'm correct, and his niece, who's called Mary Trump, who, if you are watching this, Mary Trump, I'd love to do a podcast with you. I think she's an amazing person, but I think that it's also very, very sort of eye-opening when you hear it from a family member that knows the family and what the family is like and all that. And when it comes down to it, I've said this before that, you know, that our country represents who we elect. It
mm,
sort of filters through, and I do believe that. But I think the disturbing thing is how America still think that Trump can still win the next election.
yeah,
Like, the
anymore.
going thought is that Trump is still in the background, is still there, and
Yeah,
having another term, even for trans people, there was a lot of LGBT plus were relieved when Biden won, though a lot of them were also upset when Trump lost. And this is
mm,
the one problem, and this is what I think that we need to discuss, how we can have our voices heard, because it harks back to the Harvey Milk moment, doesn't it? When Harvey Milk had the gay vote, that's what people said. He had the gay vote, that's what made him win. Yet
yeah.
nowadays, it's like that doesn't count for anything.
And I think it's like when like politicians give someone an answer, like your life is going to be better, you're going to feel more at peace, you're going to be happier if like I don't know, like there's less like brown and black people in this country, or um, you'll be safer if these people aren't like in your world or whatever. It's almost like that's the answer. That's why I'm so unhappy. Like I've been given an answer. I've been given clarity for why I feel like this. Um, so it gets kind of caught up in like trying to find an answer to happiness, to a better life. But you're kind of like so looking in the wrong direction, because like I don't believe that people find happiness and contentment from ripping down other people. I just don't believe that that is a possibility, you know?
You say that, but I also believe that there's also a bigger question, and that is an economic question at the end of the day when it comes down to it. You know, when we
Yeah,
look at our rights are based on economic situations, if we're well off, if we're not. And the US does not have a great healthcare system, let's put it point blank. Yet in
yeah,
the UK, we have the NHS, and everyone thinks, oh, it's all, you know, happy and fine, but yet we're still finding it hard. So
yeah.
what is the common ground, and how can we, you know, make a far more better world, and how can we, you know, liberate our own being?
Well, I think it's recognize the first step is recognizing that these problems have not been caused by like people of color, by refugees, by trans people,
They
by
have it worse off than the white than a
yeah,
lot of
those
white people. Like, we are
yeah, or
privileged when
people,
it comes down to it.
yeah, or like people on benefits, like none of these people are the problem. The problem is people in power who are corrupt and are
But
not using
corruption
their
has
power.
always been around. So do you think that it goes deeper than the whole idea of corruption? Because to me, corruption is like one man's treasure is another man's rubbish. Like, do you think that is the idea of corruption? Is that we look at corruption and we think that it's everywhere, but then yet when we look at it, there's more good people out there when it comes down to it. Yet it's hard to find them because of the type of voice and the standing that they have. Like, do you think that it's corruption that's making us think about trans rights, or do you think that's a far more deeper question, like religion? Like, religion is just such a vast topic, and such a topic that we never talk about when it comes down to the whole trans idea.
It is, but then I think with religion, like similarly, like there are so many religious people who aren't like fighting to take rights off other people. Like they have their religion, they practice it with other people. Um, like that's there's nothing wrong with that. Do you know what I mean? Like there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think that sometimes that gets confused with people in power who are religious leaders who are corrupt and are kind of using their power to divide people for their own purposes. So I don't think it's the thing. I don't think it's about religion. I don't think it's about politics. I think it's about the people who are corrupt and use that to gain power, basically.
How do you think we can fix the whole political system while trying to fight for the LGBT plus rights? Like, to me, I think that is, people may think that's two different things, but when you are trans or part of the LGBT plus, it's two interlinked things.
Mm,
Because when you are trans or non-binary or gay or lesbian, it affects of so much. Like, the Matthew Shepard, if I'm correct, the state that he got murdered in still doesn't have a anti, still doesn't have a hate crime sort of law, or still
mm,
doesn't have that. That's what I heard. I could be wrong, but it's that type of idea, is that America is based on different types of states with different types of laws and so many different types of things. Yet, do you think that it's easier to get trans rights and the LGBT rights in the UK than it is in the US or any other country? Like, China is finding it really hard, or South Korea or Africa, or even Europe. There's different ways of, like, if I'm correct, Switzerland, the land of, you know, the land of calmness and never go to war, thank God. Seems like they've just allowed equal marriage after
right.
this time. And to me, I think that we need to have a bigger conversation. Is it based on countries, or is it based on that it's all about timing?
I don't
That's a
know
big
really.
question, so I do apologize, but it's got to be answered.
Well, I think yeah, I think like this kind of this kind of like culture, and the way that things work in order for people in power to stay in power or to be more powerful is a universal thing. I don't think it's like a UK problem. I think it's absolutely universal. And I think often it just depends on the person in power. For example, like New Zealand. Now, like, I don't confess to, know everything about what's happening in New Zealand, but it's almost like it takes a strong leader with strong ethics and like an actual moral compass. And it's almost like the difference that can make is amazing. And it doesn't mean that they won't face like real opposition, but like it's got to start from that point. And
We've got to add content that we've got to add facts here that a lot of New Zealanders who originally lived there before the white people came, they were destroyed their habitats, homes. They really had an awful time. And it's taken decades, and even now they still don't have the full rights that they deserve, and still racism still exists wherever you live,
oh,
no
totally,
matter no matter
absolutely.
what prime minister. And I think that she's a great prime minister, but we also have to understand is that kindness does not mean better leadership. And I really think that we need to all hark back to Margaret Thatcher time. We all know who Margaret
Can
Thatcher
we
is.
not?
I know it sounds sad, but we all have to hark back to a time when we had major economic problems, yet she came along and it seems like everything got better, but actually things didn't get better because we still are fighting with the problems that we have now. So we can always look at a leader that seems strong, yet it doesn't mean strongness for everyone.
No, and yeah, it looks different, yeah, to everyone. You're right, but I think like someone who isn't interested in using their power um in like a negative destructive way, I think that's a really good start. And someone who cares about the people, not just in their country, in their territory, but all over the world, like someone with morals, ethics, and a kind person. Like, I think kindness is really important, but kindness in action, not just like someone who seems really kind.
Do you think
um
kindness is leadership? Because to me, I think a lot of people on this podcast may be hearing saying, but if you're kind, then you're weak and you're being a pushover and you're letting certain other people. Do you think kindness or do you think strength or what do you think makes a good leader, especially for the whole trans community? Because when we both did Pride a few years ago, we did Marshall P. Johnson and the others who, if people don't know, Marshall P. Johnson, people think that she committed suicide, yet a lot of people think that she got murdered. She was also a sex worker and she also had mental health issues. And she was also a person of color. But we also have to understand is that Marshall P. Johnson, and her friend, what was her friend's name? Sylvia Rain?
I think it's Sylvia Riviera.
Sylvia Riviera. If you didn't know, people can look this up on YouTube, but she went on the stage and she shouted and screamed about rights and about things, yet she got booed. And that was
Mm.
what, 1970s. And people on this podcast need to understand is that we're not all in it together. We are very divided. And our history of pride and LGBT plus isn't as welcoming as people think. Prides have gotten far more better, yet when it comes down to it, the fundamental. So I think pride, in my view, is getting, it's getting very corporate and getting very expensive. And I don't
Yeah.
think pride is going down the road of what it was meant to be. Like, I think
Mm.
it's disgusting when I see Boohoo or companies, such big companies, are sponsoring prides, and yet they're saying, well, how can we fund it? Well, we had prides before. Yeah, we got spat at, but we still had a pride.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
do
totally.
you think that we have a massive problem that's going into politics and hurting us for our rights?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pride thing, like, again, it's people in power. I don't know, like, I don't know what that's about. I think sometimes it's just about making money. I think a lot of the time it's about making money, but also it's like, it's that kind of like, who can like be the biggest pride, who can like make the most money, or who can have the biggest star, or who can have sell the most merchandise. Um,
Do you think you
like,
could tell a bit? Or do you think you could tell the audience a little bit about how you do your prides? Because I've been to your prides and they are small. Let's face it, they are probably the most village size small, but yet they are so inclusive. It is shockingly beautiful.
well, I think, thank you. Well, I think we just don't take any corporate sponsorships.
What do you
Um,
class as corporate sponsorships? Like, is it companies or is it corporate, or what do you class as not sponsorships?
well, like any like large organization, any bank, we don't have any involvement with the police.
You don't have involvement with the police.
No,
Okay. Is
used
that
to, but not anymore, not for the past couple of years.
is that because of the whole situation with Black Lives Matter, or is that because of a different situation?
It happened like moving away from the police at Pride happened before, like, not before Black Lives Matter, but that particular, when George Floyd was murdered, that particular
Hmm.
situation. So it happened before then. But
So you were
you
far
just
more
don't think.
radical and far more thinking than a lot of other people.
Well, I think it's just kind of like recognizing our own privilege as white people, and we're not perfect. For a few years, we did have the police involved at Pride, and it's only when we opened our eyes, that we recognize that. Because we were always of the opinion before that, like, oh no, you need to build bridges with organizations and people. That's the way forward. Um, but you can only do that if, like, there's a willingness on the other side, um, and that these awful things aren't still happening, but they are still happening all the time, every day. Um, and that's not going to change by us engaging with Pride, the police at a local level.
On one
It,
side,
it
I
can't change.
on one side I agree with you. On one side, I will disagree with you because I do believe the police do make a massive amount of effort to prove that they are inclusive and open. But to me, I do believe that for us to be open and transparent, I do believe that we need far more honesty when it comes down to about law. I think that law is so diverse and so diverse that it's hard to try to fathom it. I believe that the police have only got so much powers that they have, and it comes from the government, and that's the basics of it. That's how the police operate, is by how we are and how society thinks that they should be running and all that. So
Yeah, yeah.
do you believe that how you run your prides compared to London Pride, Manchester Pride, or some of the biggest prides in the world is based on a far more human like, or do you think it's based on a far more bigger picture than that?
I don't really like. I wouldn't compare myself or our pride to other prides, like, because yeah, we don't really talk about other prides, but like, um, I think what was really important for us was to remember, like, well, firstly, to actually talk to the community and see what's important to people. Also, like, really like rely on our values, and it's not kind of like in line with our values to like have,
Oh,
like, I don't know, like like a big chain restaurant leading our
is
march.
your internet
Like,
okay?
it's exact.
Sorry for interrupting. Is your
Yeah, yeah.
okay? Good. Sorry. Yes.
I think so. I think I was just stuttering a bit.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I just don't think it's like, it's not like, it's quite clear to us like what we should do and what we shouldn't do, like, just in terms of like our values. And we'd rather continue to be like a small, um we'd rather kind of continue to be like working on a budget than to sell like our souls to have a bigger event or to have more money. Just like
But
that's not what Pride's about. It's not, and it shouldn't
what
be about that.
how do you think we can improve the LGBT plus rights when it comes down to rights and pride and things like that? Like, do we have a lot of avenues to go down to winning our rights, or do you think that we've got very, very slim avenues to fight for our rights? Because if pride is getting very corporate and getting very business and not very inclusive in some ways, then how can we stamp out hatred within our politics and within our society if our whole activism is getting very money orientated? Like, do you think that we're getting very forgetting the path of where we're going, or how do you think we're doing? Like, especially when it comes down to mental health.
Um, I think it's like it's questioning this stuff, and it's like taking action. So it's not just laying back and doing nothing, even though it's like I get that sometimes we don't have the capacity to fight back. But like for those that can fight back, to be doing it and to be encouraging others to do it. So like if a pride is like, I don't know, working with an airline that actively supports the government to take refugees away from this country, like don't go to that pride, like shine a light on it, don't support it. Um,
Do you
like
think
so
that's why
doing
we're
those.
divided? Because it comes down to other things before we focus on other things. So I do think that we need to be a far more human um human people when it comes down to our morals, because I do believe that our morals are getting entwined with other things, and I do believe that we are forgetting of where we came from.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's an individual thing. Like, I think people get
Do you
lost
really
in
think so?
stuff.
Do you really
Yeah, I
think
think,
that's an individual thing? Because I believe that when it comes down to individuals, I believe that people are all morally good. But when it comes down to bigger pictures, that it's the size of what we want to be as a person, and when it comes down to it, do you think that there's a psychology factor when it comes down to it? Like, do you think that we all want to, be the best that we want, but we also have to do the things that we don't really like doing?
um, hmm,
Big question, but it's questions that we have to, ask, because as you mentioned about pride and about the police and about Black Lives Matter, and especially when it comes down to biology, it all sorts of interthinks or interlinks to the bigger questions. Is it that we are gotten to the point where we don't know what we're fighting for? Or is it because since equal marriage, people have forgotten where we are going to?
I think it's a mix. Like, I think it's not that people have forgotten what they're fighting for. It's just they don't know how to fight for it anymore because it feels like those avenues that we might have are slowly being taken away from us, like the right to protest. Um,
The right to protest, how do you mean?
well, they're just whether they've just passed it or they're passing a
Are you
law
talking
to.
about the UK government?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. I think I know what you mean. I think it's that bill that I saw a few demonstrations within Plymouth about and all that. I wanted
yeah,
to give a speech about it, but I think that you're very right about it. I don't know the bill exactly, but I do know that it's about demonstration and activism and things like that. Well, it's
yeah,
a very worrying bill, but when it comes down to it, I think that it's like a bit of a Do you think that there could be a modern Section 28? Or
yeah, totally.
do you think that
Yeah.
we're still in that environment of a Section 28, or do you think that we are just, not living in that environment, that everyone's happy and gay and that the party loves us or certain parties
No,
accept
I
us?
think I think some people are still behaving like Section 28 is still a thing. Um, and yeah, I think like yeah, though that our current government are really like taking steps to make things difficult for, and not just trans people, but really anyone that's kind of like in a vulnerable minority group. Like they don't care about any of us, you know. And so yeah, like I wouldn't put anything past them, to be honest,
I,
you know.
I do just want to say to listeners is that this is a podcast about non-political things. But what we are talking about are rights and facts and how we can evolve as a people. The stands of your political party does not. We don't care of who you vote for. We need to tell people about the facts and how we can find ways of getting the truth out there. At the end of the day, this podcast is about questions, and that's why it's called the Big Question Podcast. Thank you. Please carry
Sorry,
on.
Diana, I was being very political there.
No.
Sorry.
I really want you to carry on that thing, because I do believe that it's a very one thing, because it comes down to small little bills and comes down to small little factors when it comes down to it.
Totally.
But
Yeah.
how do you think we could have another section 20 here? And do you think that it could be something down to when it comes down to that word biology? And do you think that we need to have that discussion about how we can fight back against small-minded questions like that?
Yeah.
Because
I
not
just
every
think
dot is the same, is it?
no, I just think, yeah, I don't know, like I just think like I said before, I just wouldn't put anything past them. And I think it, you know, because of like the media and how effective it can be, I think just some of the most awful things are put through Parliament and get okayed with the help of the media. And I think, do you know what? I always think of, what's it called? I think it's called, oh no, it's called Ants. Have you ever watched Ants, the movie?
Yes, I think I know what you mean. It's when these awful angry ants want to take over the colony, yet the small ants, the ones who think they don't have no power, actually come together and realize that they've got the power. And it's that
Yeah,
it's that us against them sort of mentality, that attitude. And I do sort of agree with you, but when it comes down to the whole idea, I think the bigger question is that it comes down to praise, it comes down to the fact is who and what we are. Like, I think you said it a few years ago that in a fascinating way, that you think that most people think since we've now got equal marriage, that's it. There's nothing else to fight for. Yet there is bigger questions when it comes down to it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think, yeah, but I think it's easy to become complacent, especially if like laws that affect your life um
Do you
are
think
being
it is
passed.
because of equal marriage that people think that we've gotten to the point of that we don't need, that there is nothing else to fight for? Or what is it? What is there in society? How is it that we are fighting against the individual who is quite discriminate? Like the hate crime, I've been told recently is that the hate crime sort of you sort of go to the police and you say I've received a hate crime, yet they don't class it as a hate crime, they class it as something specific. Like, do you think that laws need to be changed? Like, what do you think we need to fight for now?
Um yeah, I mean, I definitely think, yeah, like it's about fighting for rights and for laws to be changed, but also um I don't know if you can change like someone's personal opinion, or that if that's what we should be focusing on, really.
What do you think we should
Um,
focus on?
I think we should focus on like making sure our community is stronger, and also um, looking after ourselves and each other as mental health, you know. I don't think, I think it's a bit fruitless to be kind of like focusing on someone else's like personal opinion of trans people, for example.
Do you think that
Although I think,
sorry for interrupting, do you think that it's wrong to have one person as our voice? Lady Gaga was the voice of a lot of LGBT plus people in the early tens and early 2000s, that well, not early 2000s, late middle 2000s, that she's now sort of the voice of the LGBT plus. Yet do you think it's right for her to be the single voice, or do you think that we shouldn't have just one person but have multiple voices that are the faces of our cause?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think it should just be one person or like, or even like a handful of people. Um, I just think people need to be more aware of like, it's almost like of not kind of like just idolizing one person in terms of one person's views on things, whether they're like a trans person or not. Like, yeah, and it's really, and it is important for those people like in powerful positions, like trans activists with like big followings and stuff, like to be really aware of that privilege and not talk on behalf of like every trans person, or not try to. So it's kind of like yeah, because that can be really dangerous, because then you have someone like Caitlyn Jenner who a lot of
I remember when she sort of came out and there was that sort of that whole front cover, and it was, and I thought, well, this is it. This is really it. Like, we've got someone who can speak for us now. Yeah.
yeah, unfortunately not.
Do you
And
know
that's it,
why she's not the voice of us? Like, do you know why things didn't change as much?
because I don't think she's interested in helping other trans people, if I'm honest. And I think but that's the thing, isn't it? It's like it's so dangerous to put all your like eggs in one basket. So to be like, right, Caitlyn
Sorry,
Jenner, like,
apologize about that. I've just
that's all
got
right.
over COVID and I've still got an awful cough, so I do apologize, everyone.
No, don't
Um,
worry.
I somewhat agree with you, but I wanna sort of say a few shooting points at you before we finish, because we've only got a few
Oh,
minutes.
go on then.
But the first point is that, do you remember? I don't know if you know this, but Harlequin or Hart, I think I keep pronouncing the name wrong, but well, if people could look it up, I think you will find it quite interesting. But in the early 2000s, and I mean 2000 or 2001, a famous actress played a trans guy, or it was actually based on real life, and she played this trans guy who got murdered, raped, and killed, and she actually won an Oscar for the role in the
Oh, was it
2000s.
Hilary Swank?
That's it, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of trans people at that time said, "Thank God, this is what we need. We need someone, a
Yeah.
platform like this." Yet it seems like nothing got done. And then the Danish girl came out, and then people took uproar about that. And I think it's just been Trans Remembrance Day within the UK, and I've read that we've got another record high of deaths towards trans people.
Yeah.
So do you think that things are getting worse, or do you think that things are getting better?
Mm,
I want to end on a positive note when we end this podcast, because I do believe that we need to have positivity in the world of how it
okay.
is.
Well, I think that things are getting better. I think when, do you know what I think? I think sometimes when people like vulnerable minority communities are getting stronger, like more trans people than ever are coming out. So that's a really good sign.
What is
And
your
I think
advice
there's
to trans people right now? What is your best advice to them? Sorry for interrupting.
um my best advice. I can't really give advice because what works for me might not work to other people. But what I would say is just take it at your own pace. Um, tell if you're coming out, if you're starting your transition, tell someone who you trust, like, um, and don't be and do it your way, whatever way that kind of that feels right for you, um, and find support if you can. I know it's not always easy, but find support in others who understand.
You were saying something before I interrupted you, so I do apologize. You were saying that more and more people were coming out every single sort of day.
Yeah, more and more people are coming out. So I think that's a really positive thing, and I think and our voices are getting stronger, and I think that's really positive as well.
Do you think that do you think that laws are somewhat, do you think that we are somewhat going to get to a point in sight in a few years where we are going to have our voices so big that we are going to be less divided?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I hope so. Yeah.
I do believe that, to end on this point, I do believe that we are going to get to a point where we are going to look back and say, what the hell happened?
I
And we
agree.
are we are going to do that. But the most positive thing is that whatever hatred that is going on in your life, there is always someone out there that will accept you. Whatever is happening to you right now, we're not living in the 50s, we're not living in the 80s, even things as bad as things are, we are still in a far more better position than we have ever been. There is positivity out there. Mental health is being far more understood. The celebrity culture and far more celebrities are opening up and coming out as non-binary, gay, trans, lesbian, bisexual. We
Yeah.
are all winning at the moment. We are finding it hard, but we also need to understand that what we have now isn't what we had a few years ago. Things are getting better and people are having their lives fulfilled by what things are. We must understand that we are divided, but we will survive this climax of this hatred between us.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
to leave on this point, I believe that thank you for coming on to my first podcast. It was a bit
Oh, thank you
hectic
for having me. I
with
really enjoyed it.
the cat, but to take away
I
on
think,
this point, how have you found this first podcast?
I think it was really good. I think you asked really good questions. Um, yeah, and it was like we've talked in depth and about some challenging things, and it's really made me think as well. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Do you think it comes down to thinking when it comes down to sort of doing questions? Like, do you think that's what we need to do for us to evolve, is to ask questions that we feel
Totally. Yeah.
uncomfortable?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's really important um, to have that like critical thinking. It's so important, really important
I
for
I
everyone.
I agree with you. I agree with you. This has been an amazing podcast. The greatest, the big question podcast is something to me, something very valuable, because this is a podcast where we will have to ask big, deep questions about all different types of things and all that. I really would like, I really think that for people who are listening right now, if you're on your way to shopping, if you're in the car with your kids, just know that love will always win. And I believe that whatever you feel right now can always get sorted out. Whatever you are going through with your mental health, I think Maya and I can both agree that our mental health is the most valuable thing that we can try to do within our lives, try to
Yeah.
sort out. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a lovely, lovely day, Maya.
Thank you, darling. Thank you, Diana.